She said, "You can leave. I can't hold you here. That's true. But if you leave, tomorrow morning, Peter Vallone Sr. and I are going to be holding a press conference on Wall Street telling the American financial media that the Bank of Tokyo is throwing 700 American families, many of them seniors, into the street." And then she asked them if they wanted to sit down again, which they did.
This is the Co-op and Condo Insider, the podcast dedicated to New York's cooperative and condominium communities. This is your trusted source for the latest insights, strategies, and stories shaping the world of shared housing. You will hear from the people who are leaders in this community, information and insights you will not hear anywhere else. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, you're in the right place. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the host or any affiliated individuals or organizations.
Hello and welcome to the Co-op and Condo Insider, where we explore the real-world issues facing co-op and condominium communities across New York City, with insight, expertise, and a healthy dose of straight talk. I'm your host, Jeffrey Maisel, co-op attorney and legal advisor to the President's Co-op and Condo Council. I'm thrilled to be joined by my co-host, Richard Solomon, a seasoned voice in public radio for over 20 years. Richard has taken his listeners around the world to meet experts, newsmakers, and the people making a real difference in our everyday lives. Richard, it's great to have you on the mic with us today.
Love the honor of being here, but more importantly, this is a phenomenal Binghamton reunion. I wore my alumni shirt and I brought my Speedy sauce.
There you go. That's right. Today, we're thrilled to welcome a very special guest, former New York City Council member and former State Assemblyman, Barry Grodenchik. He's someone who has spent years working on behalf of New Yorkers, and I know from my own personal experience, and Richard will interview me and Barry about our wars together back not that long ago. We're all Binghamton University alumni. So Barry, before we get into politics and policy, we got a few questions to ask you about Binghamton.
Are you a big fan of Pat Mitchell?
Yeah, it was some of the best ice cream on the planet. I don't think it's around anymore, but it was truly one of those places like Pino's Pizza on the South Side with that sourdough crust. I can still taste it in my mouth.
What dorm were you in?
I was in Delaware Hall. Well, I was president there of the dorm for one semester, and then for senior year, I was at 69 Murray.
I believe I was one of your subjects.
Yes, you were. Yes, you were.
But actually, Barry, I remember that one of the first times I met you in call it public life. I think you were with the Queensborough president, or I forget where, maybe in the assembly. And I did recognize you from just campus, just a face I probably walked by 1,000 times.
I used to tell the young people, because I did constituent work and I still do it, although I don't get paid for it anymore. But I used to tell people, the young people that work for me, when you do a favor for something, they don't forget. Most people don't forget. Some people forget, but I had a guy once who was knocking on doors and he said, you helped me with the DMV 9 years ago. And I was like, whoa.
I'd say I've been to meetings with you, Barry, and I've heard it. And, like in North Shore Towers, people remember me from 8 years ago. You did this or you that. And that must be a nice feeling.
It is a nice feeling. And more importantly, it's just to help people. I'm not a state lawmaker. I was for one term. And I know a lot of the problems that, exist in terms of unfair property taxes on co-ops and condos relate to Albany, but you can help people with things in the community, making their schools better, making their streets safer and things like that. And we were able to untie a lot of knots. We have in Eastern Queens, in the district now represented by my dear friend Linda Lee, we have a lot of great co-op. You walk these places, you don't find a blade of grass out of place, unlike my front lawn, which I can't get anything to grow, but what are you going to do?
Tell us, where were you born? Where were you raised? What was your early life like?
Born in the garden spot of the world, of course, the Bronx, New York, where my parents both grew up. My parents had moved to Pomonok Houses, which is a New York City Housing Authority development right across the street from Queens College. Fabulous, absolutely fabulous public housing. Thousands of children, between Pomonok, 4,500 apartments. People voted back then. There was, in a presidential election, 3,000 people came through the polling place. which is just staggering when you think about one polling place. So I had a wonderful childhood, went to all local public schools, graduated Jamaica High School, along with David and Mark Weprin and Leroy Comrie and Sid Davidoff, one of the more notable lobbyists in the city of New York. We also can claim Bob Beeman, world record holder in the long jump for a long time.
So you mentioned all these people. Tell us some of your experience and people that you met in your childhood or along the way that shaped your interest in public service.
Pomonok and Electchester were communities that people got involved. One of my mentors, my two mentors are of blessed memory, were Nettie Mayerson. Her son Lee is a Supreme Court Justice in Queens. She was always involved in everything. You know, every rally, she was the head of the PTA. She was this, she was that. And so there was that sense. And we went to rallies. I remember, I think I was 14, and Hugh Carey came to the Electrical Industry Center where Local 3 is located. He was 2 hours late, and I was mad, but I waited. That was what was expected in my community. In the depths of some of the worst days of New York City in the early 70s, a bunch of people in Pomonok and Electchester, guys, you know, maybe 8 years older than me, started a night softball league in the park. It brought hundreds of people out, and they didn't wait for the Parks Department to fix the lights and all that. We had young guys who were members of Local 3 brought in bucket trucks and fixed the lights and the light. So I think my youth shaped me in that sense. Growing up in public housing, being very grateful for what we had. It was expected we were going to go to college, and you know, we were working class people. We had everything, but we had everything we needed and most of what we wanted.
So was there a particular moment or issue that made you decide to run for office?
I grew up and I thought, you know, that elected officials were these special whatever, blah, blah, blah. But as I got to know people, I realized that I could do it as well. And I really enjoyed the aspect of helping people. Sometimes it's one person. I can remember a story of a woman who called Nettie's office, and she was trying to get, you know, home health aid for her mother, which was very difficult. And I gently suggested maybe, you know, a nursing home, which was much easier, although more expensive. She said no. I said, okay. I said, we're going to fight for this. And we did. But we still had a victory. I've been dedicated to making sure people have their dignity. And I understand how important government can be in the lives of people. You know, you're an attorney that deals mostly with housing. You know, imagine that your clients had a backlog of 60, 70, 80 billion, pick a number out of a hat, you know, billions of dollars to redo everything. And if you started to spend that money, things would get more expensive because you'd be chasing. There's only a certain amount of construction workers in this city and supplies and all that. So I think we need to be more creative. And I think my work suggested that I could do this. And I was inspired, you know, by Nettie and by Claire Schulman, whose office I ran for 10 and a half years, to run and to try to make a difference.
Was that your first position?
My first position in government was with Nettie for almost 2 years. And then I went to work as the regional rep for Governor Mario Cuomo. And that was very exciting. He was a dynamic individual. My boss, David Weinraub, who's now maybe I think he's the leading lobbyist in the state of New York in terms of billings. He would say, don't talk to the governor unless his hair's on fire. But, you know, we talked to him. I think he really just tried to help people as well. He saw injustice, and he did it in his way as a community attorney. He tried to save the homes of Corona homeowners back in the late 60s. He fashioned a compromise on the NYCHA development in the edge of Forest Hills. So, you know, a smart guy and a good guy and a brilliant orator, one of the great orators of our time.
You have any good stories or personal stories about him?
After Yusuf Hawkins was murdered, a terrible tragedy in this city, the governor was extremely serious that day. So we held a press conference. And one thing I loved about Mario Cuomo was he read his briefings and he committed them to memory. I don't know how. Gabe Pressman, who was not a big guy, looking up, Mario was like 6'1", 6'2". And the governor, Gabe says, Governor, why did you come to Flushing today? And then he looks down at Gabe and he says, Gabe, as I'm sure you remember, implying that he was this old, on December 27th, 1657, the Flushing Remonstrance was signed here. John Bing, my former colleague in the Assembly, he gives me grief on that. You know, he always makes fun of me, but in a good way. And so he talked about tolerance. We had Julia Harrison, the councilwoman there. And then later on, we had a meeting with civic leaders in the Flushing Library. I could tell by the way he responded to people he had read. I had to give like a paragraph mini bio for everybody, and it was just amazing. He remembered their nicknames, and it was just like, whoa, tour de force. He didn't have it in front of him. He didn't need to read from a book. He was, he was the law professor. Just a phenomenal guy.
Oh, thank you for that. That was amazing. Great man. Great man.
Great man.
So let's talk about another great man. You. What was your first elected office?
Was Assemblyman from downtown Flushing, the 22nd district. I lasted one term.
What year? What year was that?
I was elected in 02 and served in 03 and 04. And then I lost. I went into the private sector doing consulting and lobbying. And then Helen asked me to be her deputy borough president for her last term in office starting in 2010.
You worked in the Queensboro president with Claire Shulman?
Yeah, I went from Nettie to Mario Cuomo, and then Claire called me one day. She had tried to hire me right after I took the job with the governor, and I said, my boss stuck his neck out, David Weiner. I don't want to cut it off, So she said, all right, whatever. And then about a year and a half later, she called me. The woman who had the job I eventually took was leaving. She called me, and she said, the borough president would like to see you. And I said, okay. And I said, you want me to come now? And she said, no, tomorrow morning, 9:00 would be great. So at that time, I was living very close to Borough Hall. And so I went to meet her. But I called back and I said, can I ask you what this meeting's about? She said, it's personal. So I immediately called my spy at Borough Hall. And I said, who's leaving? She said, that woman's leaving. And Claire interviewed me. And she said to me, I'm only interviewing one other person, but you're very high on my list. So I thought to myself, who wants to be low on a 2-person list? Oh my God, But that day she called me. She called me the next day and asked me to come work for her.
My one Claire Shulman story, because I only have one. Co-ops in Queens were ready to go bankrupt,
right?
And things were a disaster. And you were probably at that meeting, and I walked in.
I probably set up the meeting, but
you probably set it up.
Yeah,
and I was shaking in my boots. I'm not gonna lie to you. She was intimidating.
She was, and it worked to her effect. Believe me.
I walked in the room. She sat there. I don't think she looked up at me. I think she might have said hello, but it was a good meeting. I do remember we got a lot done.
There was a great co-op and condo crisis, especially in Queens, but really throughout New York City. And we got calls from Brooklyn and Manhattan asking if Claire would set up meetings for them. I said, I'm sorry, you have to contact your own borough presidents. We can't reach into those boroughs. What happened was we had rent stabilized buildings. And because you only needed 15%, I believe, Jeff, you'll correct me on the facts, 15% of renters to agree to join a co-op, it was a very low threshold. And of course, the carrying costs for the co-op were higher, but you couldn't raise the rent stabilized tenants' rent because, that's the law. And so what happened was a lot of people made a lot of money on these conversions. And then they started, somebody said, oh, we need X a month, but we only have 80% of X. And we did workouts, and sometimes we did them twice on about 20,000 units of housing, which is a phenomenal number. Peter Vallone Sr. was the councilman there, and Claire and him were in a meeting. And among I think the people who held the underlying mortgage was the Bank of Tokyo. So they came to the meeting, they got up, and they were about to leave. And Claire, as you alluded to before, she was one tough cookie. She said, you can leave. I can't hold you here. That's true. But if you leave tomorrow morning, Peter Vallone Sr. and I are going to be holding a press conference on Wall Street telling the American financial media that the Bank of Tokyo is throwing 700 American families, many of them seniors, into the street. And then she asked them if they wanted to sit down again, which they did. They ate $17 million, if my memory is correct. So the good news is that this was a time when banks were starting to have big profits. And so they were able to write off these losses, but they were as negligent as anybody in making these loans and say, not doing the math. They were very happy to place the loans, but Claire did a phenomenal job of doing work. There was a lot of meetings on co-op and condo workout.
That was kind of my start in this advocacy world. You got elected to the city council. What year was that?
Special election 2015 after Mark
Yes.
Weprin resigned.
That's when you and I started collaborating.
Right. Yes, we did. It was
Yes.
among my opponents. It was a very genial race. Jeff, you represented and represent a lot of the co-ops and condos in that part of the world. We have thousands and thousands of units. We had one issue at Glen Oaks where we changed the law on gas hookup, natural gas hookups. And so they got caught up because, over 20 or 30 years, Uncle Morty comes over and installs your dryer and this one and that one. But the problem was we had two buildings in Manhattan that literally blew up, killing like a dozen people. And so the city council tightened the laws. So I had the director of gas operations for the buildings department, and the meeting got a little heated. But by the time they were done, we had come to some kind of solution. And Bob and the head of the gas operations were backslapping each other. So, I learned from Claire, really, and Nettie, you got to put people in the room. That's how you get things done. You can't have, I can't tell you how many meetings took place at Borough Hall, 20, 30, 40, 60, 70 people in the room around this enormous table. And the door would open and say, she did it again, and I had a friend of mine who worked for Nassau Bus call me once about Claire. I'll tell you, he said, I don't know what your boss did, but the people at the Long Island Railroad are terrified of her. I said, because she asked for basic stuff. Just tell them to do what she wants. It's not going to cost them that much. And, she's not asking for gold-plated trains. She wants services for her constituents.
Do you both feel that in those days, by not having the internet, by not having immediacy, by having real in-person interactions, more groups, that you're able to be more effective in getting substantive change accomplished?
I think there's an argument to be made for that. Face to face. It's I like to meet face to face, and I always did. And Jeff probably knows that or remembers that. Obviously, during the age of COVID, things changed, and I was in office when COVID hit, and it was very frustrating because some of the stuff that I wanted to accomplish just got dust in the winded because of that. We got a lot done. There's always more that you want. I think you're right. It's more effective when people meet together and they get to know one another.
Rich, I think it's a mixed bag. I think if you want to get something done on an issue and there's immediacy to it, certainly a in-person meeting is the way to go. However, the digital world has opened up things like this podcast. So, thousands of people can learn about Barry Grodenchik. So let's go back to issues that starting in 2015. And again, I was lucky enough to work with you for many years, and I did experience your old school style, I'll call it, your hands-on approach. We did have many meetings, and I do remember specific issues. You'd call us in, you'd tell us there was a hearing coming up, you'd get us in the first 2 tables or 3 tables of the hearing, because after that, nobody listens. And we got a lot done on many, many co-op issues. And I appreciate it. We appreciate it. And we appreciated working with you. And one issue, throw it out there, the Climate Mobilization Act was an issue that we worked with you and with various council members. We didn't have numbers. We didn't know what it was going to cost. We knew and it was hard to follow. If you read the statute and understood it, you're either a genius or you're lying. And we got a lot of assurances from leadership and from the sponsor of the bill, Casa Casanitas, that the
friend
details
of mine and a good man,
and the details would be worked out. But here we are 5 years later.
It passed toward the end of toward the end of
2019.
my term. But I think we had assurances from the mayor's office and from council that we would be able to negotiate. One of the problems we had, I said to Steve, he came back from the first meeting. He said the city can't decide what's a garden apartment. So that was a big problem. And, these meetings don't take place every day. They take place, you'll have one in November and then you'll have another one in January. And then COVID hit. And, issues like climate change and all that, while still important, took a back seat to getting, Mr. and Mrs. Smith food. I think that's one of the things that really hurt to amend the laws. I voted for the bill with the understanding that we would follow up on it and tweak it to make it more palatable. But
Well, one of the promises was, and this is in an article that Costas quoted, that co-ops and garden apartments would be actually exempt. And Barry, I don't know if you remember, you set up a meeting for you and I to meet with city council staff regarding garden apartments. And we went to, it was in 250 Broadway. And we go in a room, and we were the two oldest guys by about 25, 30 years. Everybody had laptops. And we began to realize all these young people in the room, they're all data scientists counting carbon emissions. And we said, we're here to represent people. And we talked about garden apartments. And they had to Google garden apartments. And they said, oh, yeah, my aunt in Flushing lives in one.
Sometimes bureaucrats and elected official staff, you have to remember that it's a great honor to work in government. It should be considered that. And you're there to help people. I understand you're getting paid and all that, and that's important. But at the end of the day, if we're not doing what needs to be done to help people with their various problems, what's the point? The point isn't about collecting a paycheck. So, when you tell me stories like that, it can drive me crazy, because yes, those figures are important, but if Mr. and Mrs. Smith or Mr. and Mrs. Jones or whatever can't pay their bills, then that kind of doesn't really matter to them so much.
We are meeting with various groups, including unions, and we actually have a meeting later this week with an environmental group to explain, what it means for stakeholders, and co-op owners and condo owners are stakeholders in Local Law 97. And, it's all great to reduce carbon emissions, but if you can't pay the electric bill, it doesn't matter what you're burning, because people are going to be displaced.
Well, New York is the most energy efficient state in the nation. So we're doing our part largely because of mass transit. I'm going tomorrow morning to take an older sister to the doctors and down in Greenwich Village, Union Square area. And I'm going to take, I'll drive over to Bayside, I'll park, and I'll take the Long Island Railroad in. The Long Island Railroad is a generally on time, comfortable ride. And, from Bayside, it's like 30 minutes into Midtown. It's great,
Yeah.
And now you can go either to Penn Station or Grand Central.
Yeah, after $14 billion, it's the nicest station in New York City. I mean, it's just amazing. But hey, what can you do?
What would you say was your greatest, proudest moment in serving the people? What do you say when you look back? What do you say? That was really cool.
You like to think, I was, very proud to be part of Claire Schulman's executive management team. We saved the homes, and not only the homes, but the money, because had those co-ops gone out of business, not only would they have lost their homes, they would have still owed the money on their, on the underlying, on the mortgages. So now, it's a double kick in the ass. In my own district, when I was in the council, I can look around. I visited every school every year. Ari said, you're going to be like Chuck Schumer visiting every county. I said, yes, I am. But I wanted the principals to know that I was there for them. And we did a lot of good work. I would say I brought resources to the school system in excess of what they would have gotten anyway, of close to $300 million in 6 years. The last construction that I started, and I thank Linda Lee for finishing it, is an addition to PS 26 along 73rd Avenue in Fresh Meadows. Looks fabulous. And
it does. And the basketball courts in front look great.
Right. We did build 3 new school additions, and we added two Catholic schools. The community in Bayside Hills and the community in Queens Village was thrilled. So St. Robert Bellarmine, Our Lady of Lourdes schools are now New York City public schools. We took an old bowling alley that had been a charter school that the city had a lease on. We turned that into an early childhood center along Jamaica Avenue. So major investments. But, it starts with one thing. I got a call just as I was elected to the council. There is a child, and his biggest thrill every year is to go to the Thanksgiving Day parade. And his mother told me, he watches, videos of the parade year round. And I got a call from Mark McMillan, who is the district manager still of Community Board 13. And he asked me if I could help. I says, Mark, if I can't get this kid 2 tickets, I shouldn't be in the New York City Council. And so every year when I was in office for 6 years, I remembered, but without being prompted, we got that kid, with his mom, or whoever went with him to the parade. We got them 2 tickets so they could sit with dignity. And that's some of the stuff you can do for people. So, it may not be the greatest thing I did, but I remember it very fondly. And, that's the kind of stuff you can do for people. And that's what people should be doing. I think there's too many press conferences now and not enough action.
So this is we're coming to a close. Rich, you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready.
You go ahead, shoot.
All right. Favorite neighborhood in New York City?
I gotta say my own neighborhood because it's where I live, but I don't really think about it. I love Greenwich Village. It's I love Flushing. Downtown Flushing is amazing. There's vibrancy all over New York, though.
By the way, when you were in Flushing with Governor Cuomo, did you go to Gloria Pizza?
No. We went to 10 Ren Tea House, and we stopped. I remember 10 Ren, because the governor asked about the bags under his eyes, and he said that he looked in the mirror. He said, they're still there. And the woman said, it takes 24 hours to get rid of the bags under his eyes.
Moving along. Bagel or Bialy?
Bagel, but just by a little bit.
All right. Mets or Yankees?
Oh, it's not even Mets. See my shirt? It says Mets on it.
There you go. Even though you were born in the Bronx. All right.
I was born in the Bronx, but I'm Queens raised.
Book or movie that really inspired you?
Power Broker. I know that seems like a cliche answer. You're going to hear about it a lot. I got to meet Robert Caro, who's the author of The Power Broker, but we were talking about his LBJ bios, and I told him I almost didn't want to meet him because you shouldn't meet your heroes, that thing. And I said I was talking to somebody about my favorite chapter in the book about rural electrification, and he said that's my favorite chapter in the book. And I just threw up my hands. I said I'm done. It's not going to get any better than that.
If you didn't do what you did, either politics or financial endeavors, what would you do instead? Or what would you have done?
I would have been a right fielder for the New York Mets.
There you go. Any hidden talents, special hobbies that we don't know about?
I like to walk, but that's really not a special. I left that to my older brother, Max, who was an actor, and he achieved fame on Star Trek Deep Space Nine with a recurring character called Rom. And people will come up to me to this day and they say, are you related to Matt? I'm like, only since I'm born. I like to drive long distances. 800 miles in a day is not much for me.
Roughest politics, state, city, or temple?
Temple, not even close.
All right, listen.
Not even close. But,
all right.
That's an honor. That's what I'm doing now. I'm president of my synagogue and I'm president of the Queens Jewish Community Council. I got to plug them both. But my life work has been about bringing people together, and it doesn't always work. But Alex Rosa used to say, "If you don't ask, people can't say yes." And I think people need to get back to disagreeing without being disagreeable. I think we've lost some of that.
Barry, you're a true legend in New York City and state politics. I loved hearing from you, and we owe each other lunch.
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm always
Rich,
ready for
thank
lunch.
you again.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
Thanks for listening to the Co-op and Condo Insider. We hope you found today's conversation informative and insightful. Don't forget to subscribe. We're available on all major podcast platforms. Until next time, stay informed.